Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. On behalf of myself, Eric Hansen, and all of us here at OTT.X, we are so happy you are joining us today. Whether you're watching live or on demand, it's a privilege to share with you the experience, insights, and wisdom from the people that are shaping the OTT CTV industry. For organizations seeking to monetize video content in today's complex media ecosystem, it's often challenging to acquire and use data to help sustain these organizations amongst the turbulence of our dynamic industry. There are indeed many obstacles, some of which include collecting, analyzing, and applying data for optimal content and revenue performance, and identifying metrics that content sellers and streaming services can rely on to make critical business decisions. At the same time, tracking and managing all this data isn't perfect and it isn't free. It's important to understand the limitations and pain points of data, analyzing it and everything associated with it, how standardization and best practices can facilitate possible or positive returns related to information management. It's a long list and a complicated one, but thankfully we've got two fonts of wisdom in our industry here to discuss these points and to present key findings from the soon-to-be-released 2024 State of Content Performance Data Executive Survey. This is a custom research study of more than 45 top media and entertainment execs collected through an in-depth survey and interviews. With that, I'm excited to turn things over to Jennifer Kent and to Mark Moeder.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks so much for that introduction and for hosting us today. Hi, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Eric. A pleasure to be here. And also, I don't know the last time I was called a font of wisdom, so I greatly appreciate that as well. So just a warm welcome to everyone in attendance. I think I've been pretty prevalent in the space, so I hope I know many of you. But I'm really pleased to partner here today with Jennifer Kent of Parks and Associates. We partnered together to do this research and analysis, and we're super excited to bring forth kind of a sneak peek or early view into some of our findings, and also bringing forth some of the voices from your peers or maybe even you yourself as we conducted this research. So looking forward to this being both informative, intriguing, but also want to make this a dialogue, right? So, please send your questions along. Jennifer and I are both happy to respond to the extent we can. But for those that I don't know, or for those that don't know me, just a quick introduction to who SymphonyAI is. So we are a multi-vertical big data and AI company. And what makes us a little bit different is we create a vertical focus amongst a myriad of different verticals, such as retail, CPG, financial services, manufacturing, and others. And we work with some of the largest companies in the world, helping them with their data, helping them understand consumer behavior, helping them understand, in the case of fintech, fraud, and real-time analysis of all millions of transactions. On the media side, we've been around for well over 35 years. Historically, we have served the kind of the linear broadcast cable network space, helping them understand their subscribers, the trends, the content, what's resonating with the viewership. And then about 2 years ago, we expanded our Revidia platform onto the digital side. As many of you know, the data depth and volume on the digital side is magnitudes more complicated and disparate than what you would find in the old linear days. And so we partnered with a lot of the great media companies, primarily the content owners, to help them bring back content, actual engagement metrics, understand that, normalize it, so they really get a sense for what the consumer is doing and what they're saying with their viewership. As many of you know, and as I'm sure Jennifer will go into here shortly, it's kind of a quagmire of data. And the first step to actually taking action on it is to understand what the data is telling you. So that's really our primary value proposition. Beyond that, then we get into optimization, reporting, forecasting, and all of the future things. But really, it's that data analysis that's important. So I'll pause there, and then happy to reintroduce Jennifer Kent, VP of Research for Parks and Associates, who will go through some of our early findings. Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. If I haven't met you out there, thanks so much for attending today. I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research with Parks Associates. Hopefully you're familiar with Parks' work. If not, we're a market research and consulting company that specializes in emerging consumer technologies, spanning really the whole kind of consumer product lifespan, as well as the connected home markets, and certainly the entertainment platforms, entertainment devices, entertainment services, and also sort of the internet and access services that wrap around that. We've been tracking this market for many years in our own research of quarterly surveys of 8,000 to 10,000 U.S. internet households and what they want out of their streaming services and their entertainment solutions, as well as engaging with great industry leaders like SymphonyAI to understand and go deeper in specific areas to better understand how a market is shifting or moving, or how executives are maybe struggling with certain elements of the market. And so this was such a timely study, I thought, because of a lot of what Mark really just mentioned there. I mean, the ability for those in the streaming markets to actually conduct business today, it's a really difficult market, very fragmented market. It's everybody's looking for profitability and relying on this very disparate set of data in order to conduct operations and seek that profit. And so that's one of the reasons behind engaging in this research effort, where we conducted a mixed method. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey, and then we're going to go through a couple of different categories of knowledge that we learned and findings from the survey. So we did a mixed method approach here, where we did both surveys of streaming executives and also in-depth interviews to really understand what you and many of your peers are struggling with here. And thanks again to SymphonyAI Media for partnering with us on that. We've specifically also focused within this research, and we're going to talk about this in a couple different ways, is first the distribution landscape, in particular being so fragmented, and how executives are conducting operations today in this environment. What are they struggling with? What do they seek to improve? How are they making things work? We got also pretty detailed on the types of data they have access to and the types of data they'd like to see. And we're going to share some of that and talk about that. And then also to talk about productive steps forward and new approaches that might make things better. So let's dive in here, and I'd like to share a little bit about who it is that we talk to, because that matters so much in research. So we really focused on high-level executives that are in the streaming market. Either they have in the entertainment market generally, but they either have a streaming application, direct-to-consumer application, they have content that they own or they aggregate, and they're distributing either through their own, again, direct-to-consumer application, or commonly through third-party platforms. I'll show you that in a minute. Now, everybody had to have a role in acquiring content, producing content, distributing content to be able to give us their insights. We wanted a variety of businesses represented here. So you can see that on the revenue side, that we were looking for both small and large organizations, so that we got a variety of viewpoints, as well as, these executives represent businesses that are distributing content, certainly in the US and North America, but also commonly in Europe, Latin America, and also in Asia and Africa as well. So, a really global footprint among these executives. As I mentioned, we wanted to make sure that we had a variety of viewpoints of how these executives and their organizations are operating within the streaming ecosystem. Nearly everybody has some sort of direct-to-consumer app, and the app itself and the streaming service, available directly for download, of course, through the app stores, but across CTV platforms. And then about 2/3 also are acquiring and distributing video assets through third-party platforms as well. And I'll show you in a minute a little bit more detail on what that meant. We also welcomed insight from the CTV platform providers, who themselves also have streaming services. For instance, the Samsung and Roku's and Amazons of the world also themselves have streaming apps, especially when you think about the FAST services that they're bringing to market. Almost everybody had some sort of original content themselves, and licensing content from others is, of course, ubiquitous. Okay, one more layer deeper about who we talked to, and then we'll go into what they told us. So when distributing through third-party platforms, primarily today, the executives that we were talking to are distributing through third-party platforms that have a subscription model or a fast ad-supported bundle of linear channels type model. There's also some engagement, of course, with an AVOD type model, and even 42% that they are putting their content through transactional services. Of course, this is a big deal, and windowing that premium first release content to be able to drive downloads, rentals, etc. But really subscription and fast platforms as being the main third-party distribution platforms that executives are and streaming organizations are distributing content through today. We'll share this a couple times, but Mark did mention that the white paper, the custom report that includes these results is available to download today. So this QR code will take you to the full results that you can read about them in detail, and we'll share this QR code a few different times that you can find that information. Okay, so as we get into the first, set of learnings here, I think it's really important to, again, focus on where the executive's mindset are at today. We know it's a very, very tough competitive landscape. We know that we're at a phase in the market that the first 5 to 8 years are really focused on building subscriber bases, pumping money into original content and exclusive content so that you can attract those subscribers and grow those subscribers. And we're really in a different part of the market now where everyone's looking for profitability, and that investment in exclusives and content production and scaling at any cost has met reality. So our executives are focused on this tough competitive landscape, how to generate advertising dollars and how to, of course, retain those subscribers. And right up there with that is this issue of data fragmentation. So if you're trying to optimize your business to the best of your ability, what sort of insights are you basing your strategic decisions on? And so really interesting to see that actually right up in the top 4 answers of the challenges that these executives are expecting to face this year and next year. And maybe I'll pause there and market your maybe color commentary here a little bit on, you guys are interacting with so many executives as well. Is this where you see, your client and customer base really focused on this year?
Yeah, I think for me at least, and the conversation inevitably goes here, the data and the data fragmentation, because without that, you don't know what's working and what's not, right? You don't know, for attracting and retaining subscribers, what are they engaging with? What do they want to watch more of? And with that, it possibly begets more advertising dollars, et cetera. And that's really far and away, I think, the biggest challenge in the space at present that many people are trying to solve. The other part of that is kind of some parenthetical awareness, right? So you might know what you're doing relative to, your comedy's performance from a monetization layer, from a subscriber engagement level, et cetera. But is that good? Is that good relative to your peers? Is that good relative to other comedies on different platforms? And the data can start to answer that, right? I mean, that's some of the insights that we're bringing forth to our customers here on our next release. And that level of competitive insight, I think, starts to answer then why. And that, I think, is most important to try to ultimately engage the subscriber and reach that profitability marker.
Yeah, and on this competitive insight, landscape level 2, I'd say that generally in the companies that we're talking to, obviously there's a big eye on acquisitions and partnerships and mergers and trying to understand, who's doing well and who's not. Generally, it's just such a kind of a hole of information today. So this really all works together. And it wasn't a surprise to me to see this issue of kind of lacking data and data fragmentation be sort of part of the foundation of the struggle here. Well, so let's look at what we learned about what fragmentation, really means and the impact here. So just to put some numbers on it, we did want to quantify in talking to the executives for your organization and the content that you own or acquire, through how many different platforms are you distributing your content? And on average, they told us 18 different platforms. So as you saw before, some of it's going to an SVOD platform, some of it's going into a fast channel, some of it's going into a transactional store for download. Some of it is through the direct-to-consumer streaming app. This is the average. So you can imagine we got quite a few results actually that were far beyond that. So that hopefully this resonates with you as well, for the attendees, thinking about how many different platforms you're trying to manage, distribute content through, and maybe even understand, what's performing better than others, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of being up on certain platforms. And so with that, we had 71% of our executives tell us, no surprise, that it is difficult to see all of their streaming data in one place. And almost half said that they don't have all of the data that they felt like they need in order to make good business decisions. And in our interviews here, I love to call out some of the qualitative quotes that they shared with us, anonymized here. But one streaming content owner who also, aggregates a lot of content, mentioned that they just don't have a really good sense of, in any given month, what is actually affecting watch time for, let's say, a specific piece of content. They might be able to see it on a very aggregated, here, this is fast channel specific, like at the channel level. But what about at the individual content level? And of course, we have fast channels across different platforms. That aggregated view is so hard, to get to. And, Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the impacts of this fragmentation that you're seeing, or especially, the differences in reporting is one thing that I heard a lot, obviously. For all of those 18, I'm going to go back to this a second. For all of these 18 different platforms, you're not getting data in the same way.
Right. And nor are you getting data that means the same thing, right? What constitutes a view is wildly different from platform to platform. Even the names of content is wildly different. So, just understanding, because it's a ubiquitous title, the Big Bang Theory, Big Bang, there's all these different permutations that create challenges for, the source or the upstream to really understand how it's working universally. I think the other thing to note, I think on that quote, it was a really good quote, because the data that you're getting from your distributor, your partners, they might not have necessarily all the data readily available. I'm not trying to cast aspersions or make anyone out to be, kind of the enemy here. Everyone's trying to work this out together. Technology can help. Like for many of our customers, even if the only thing available is aggregate data, we can dovetail in third-party data sets, whether it be ad impressions or something else, to kind of derive that ultimate, content level performance. So there's ways to get there, but obviously, to Jennifer, your point, the complexity starts to magnify, which is why, tools exist, such as SymphonyAI, to kind of bring these things together to help shape and understand what's happening, so you know what to do next. Because, as you astutely point out, if you don't know what is attracting the consumer, what they're engaging with, you don't know how to do more of it. And that's the biggest value prop that we try to solve.
Yeah. Well, so let's go one layer deeper and look at the specific data that the executives are interested in, what they feel like they have access to, because this is something we're really curious to know. Not all data is going to tell you the same thing when you are planning your content acquisition strategy or your distribution strategy, or looking at where, to optimize that budget for the year. So I only show this kind of eye chart here to point out that we tested 36 unique KPIs, right, of data insights that we thought streaming executives might find particularly insightful, grouped generally in 3 different categories. So one is just if you have a direct-to-consumer app and you're, of course, distributing that through third-party platforms, right? What is really interesting to you to understand about app performance, and also viewer engagement with that app, and how much data do you get there, and what's really valuable. The second being about the content specifically within the application, or again, within a channel. So for the content that you own or aggregate, what do you want to know about content performance? And then the other bucket is really about the money. So how are you making money? How are you assigning money to different types of content? What are you looking for on the advertising side, which we know, getting the advertising metrics right is so important. And so, we tried to give our executives a big wealth of, a list here to respond to and tell us, what rises to the top. So looking across all three of those categories and all of those 36 metrics, there were some that really stood out to us. We asked them to rate them on two different qualities here. So one is how useful do you find these types of metrics, or would you find them if you had access to them? So how useful would this data be to you? And then secondly, do you feel like you have access to this data? Do you have no access, some access, or we've got all we need on this point? And these are the 5 metrics that really stood out as having this huge gap in between them, where they felt like this data would be extraordinarily useful, but also had particularly low access. So relatively few executives telling us that they actually had all they needed. And what stood out to us is that there's it's sort of grouped around a few things. So first of all, you have to know how many viewers you actually have. And so the idea that you don't have all of that data is definitely concerning. The second one is revenue generated specifically for a content asset, right? So knowing how a specific content asset or a title is performing, again, only 44% felt like they had all they needed there. The next one is really around the viewer. Actually, the third and the fifth here are really around the viewer. So understand the demographics of your viewer. This is definitely a type of information that a lot of times the platforms are not sharing through. It's the type of data set that they would consider proprietary, that's helpful for them and their own competitive, strategy. However, it's really limiting for those downstream to not be able to really understand well who their audience is. And that's the same kind of for that last category, engagement by demographics, which is, again, who is watching more, who's watching less, who's dropping in more, how are they coming in? And then finally, revenue generated by content genre. I would sort of group with content asset. It's how is my content making money? So really big gaps there. Mark, I don't know if you have some comments here on the data, if this was surprising to you, or if this is also what you're hearing from your clients.
No, it's absolutely what I hear kind of prevalently throughout the entire industry. And I think, as you know, each one of these segments, they kind of spiderweb and shatter into 15, 20 other segments underneath each one of them. Because ultimately it comes down to what content do I have? What is the depth of my catalog or my library? What is the consumer resonating against, which I think goes to like the content genre versus the content asset and title. Content's performing well, but only on 2 titles. How do we expose the other 15 titles back to that consumer to keep themselves engaged? And I think as important as anything, and it goes back to several slides ago, the ROI on content itself, right? What should I go license? What should I go produce myself with a high likelihood of an ROI against that? Because it's something my consumer wants to see, wants to watch, wants to invest their time in. But really, these are absolutely the top 5, and there's so many dimensions underneath them that can then be answered, not just the what, but the why.
Well, and to pull out a, specific quote again from one of the executives that we spoke to about, well, what are you sort of doing in this use case? One common theme that we heard is there's a whole lot of extrapolation, happening. So you might be able to see viewer demographics for your own direct-to-consumer content and streaming app. And so can we make good judgments based on assumptions that the content that we're distributing through third-party platforms are the same people? But then a lot of concern, we heard that they didn't feel like that was a good assumption. They know that there's different demographics that are coming to different platforms for different reasons. And so not being able to see that, they feel like they're doing the best thing that they can, but also in some ways assuming that's probably not what they need to do. So a lot of, again, sort of extrapolation on to try and make it work.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to add to that, because obviously SymphonyAI, we work with platforms as well. I've had lots of great conversations with kind of everyone in the ecosystem. And I think historically, data sharing there was resistance to that because it's, I heard the phrase, it's secret sauce or it's our IP so many times, even as recently as 12, 18 months ago. And there was concern around sharing too much data, which kind of gives up what their value prop is to their consumer base. And the reality is, I think we're kind of turning a corner here to understanding that you can share more data in a private way. You can still do some anonymization and obfuscation there, but we can bring the content owners enough data to answer some of these questions that you, Jennifer, yourself are posing. And it's more of a partnership. I constantly have always looked at it as when you've got a B2B situation here, the platforms are effectively reselling a product to their consumers, right? And understanding what products are selling and then getting to the heart of why helps create a better product on the next release window, right? Those types of things coming in. And I'm seeing, thankfully, a lot more talk of transparency, a lot more action in transparency, and a lot more dialogue around what data KPIs matter and how do we get that back to the content owner. So I've seen kind of a shift there in the approach and the dialogue, which is, I think, healthy and very productive for the overall market.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just to kind of build off of that and some of the interviews that we conducted, and also we did a little workshop of this material and to get more executive insights during Parks Associates Future Video Conference last year. And we did hear some not wanting to be shared by name, but some, openness to platforms sharing a little more, or even some very kind of niche platforms that aren't the big leaders saying, we think that we can actually differentiate our platform by sharing more. So this is something that we know the content owners want more of. We think that they're going to bring us better content if we share more data with them. And so, put that in their hands. And so we did hear, some movement during that workshop and in our interviews as well. Now we got a question in that relates to this question here. So I thought I might just go ahead and take it related to metadata. And Mark, maybe you can also comment on this. So on these top 5 metrics, I'm assuming they're in this chart here, do you have a sense of how the engagement level, right, the engagement level by demographics here, is that complicated by a lack of good title level metadata? So, would it be easier? Do you see that there are some reports, for instance, that are better than others because the metadata associated with the titling, or that the content owners can even do a better job on metadata, to help enrich, these reports? Is there anything that you can comment on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I read that question is more around kind of content exposure, understanding the depth of library. And to your point, Devinder, a lot of that does come down to the metadata. It's hard to find something if the source for search is title only. If I don't know the title, I don't know how to search for it. But the more you can kind of dimensionalize the content through synopsis, summaries, age ratings, genre, all those tags really help bring forth and surface that content to the consumer, which does weigh into demographics, right? Whether it be around the world or pockets of the, North America or whatever, people like different things in different regions. It really comes down to discoverability, and I think the metadata is kind of critical to helping with that discovery.
Thanks so much for the question. We love questions, so feel free, others here, to go ahead and put questions in. Okay, so let's talk about some of the revenue data specifically. So 2 of these were in the top 5, so you saw these already about really executives finding revenue generated by genre and then actually by content asset title being particularly useful. Also interesting to see that not everybody feels like they have the data they need to understand average revenue per user, which would be a little bit more, potentially specific to, your direct-to-consumer app that is subscribing in, but there may be a variety of ways that consumers are actually subscribing in. If you think about all the bundles and all the partnerships that are happening today, average CPN, and then ad fill rates came up in interviews and the survey as well. Not being able to see their ad fill rate, and this feeling like this puts them at a disadvantage to be able to understand really the value of the content. Can they have more access to inventory so they can do their own selling to get that ad fill rate up, right? A lot of interesting pain points around the advertising metrics, but specifically ad fill rate here. So is there anything, Mark, that you're seeing, really related to advertising that is impactful, or that, again, you're able to kind of plug together from a variety of different sources to help show that picture better?
For sure. And by the way, for the audience, Jennifer's cheating a bit because she knows I have an ad tech background. So yeah, I mean, all of this kind of leads into what should you do, right? How do you optimize moving forward? And without some of these data sets, it's really hard to do that. So as an example, ad fill rate, understanding that through either from your partners or bringing in straight from the ad servers, or, Jennifer, you mentioned if you're direct to consumer, we can get that data, right? And bring it, compile it, and understand it. Then from that, you can understand, does that change the commercial terms with the distributor? Maybe instead of a flat rate, we want to do, or maybe instead of a rev share, we want to do an inventory split. And we're going to own, as the content owner, the source, we're going to take 20% of the inventory. And that enables a really collaborative conversation, I think, between the content owner and the distributor, which really lifts the boats on both sides, because the more everyone makes, the more they can invest, the more both parties are profitable or reaching that mark, etc. So that's absolutely critical, and that there is means to get that, right? Whether it's integrations with the DSPs or SSPs, or a conversation straight with the platform who might be kind of between you and the DSP. It's a dialogue. That information is obtainable.
We definitely heard through several interviews that there is a willingness for content owners to go and sell their own inventory. Now, that might not be true for every organization, it depends on your skill set, but also the feeling like they might be hamstringed if they don't have all of the content, especially related to demographics, in order to manage that ad inventory. And so there's this sort of handcuffing that's happening, and I felt like I need to know more about my viewer to make the best ad sales, and I want to go and sell this inventory, and I'm going to be awesome at it, but that there's a little inefficiency in the market because they're not getting the feedback loop that they need. Yeah, and that's absolutely a problem. I mean, I won't go into the terminology, but in the ad side, there's terms to basically bundle your subscribers. I'm really strong in these dimensions, whether it be male versus female, households with children, with this type of content, this type of consumption. And that's what really helps you, going back one column, helps you increase your CPM, because now the advertisers know what they're getting for it, right? And then through analysis, understanding whether you leave it to the programmatic market, whether you sell direct, because you know exactly what the advertiser's after and what you can deliver for them. All of these things absolutely kind of weave in and amongst themselves for optimization. So just one last question for you here before we move on, related to advertising. Obviously, advertising is in a huge upswing as far as attention, investment, more streaming services incorporating advertising as a core foundational business model, to go along subscribers and, of course, reach that profitability I was talking about. Are you seeing that these types of metrics alongside that, right, are becoming more and more important as far as like where executives are focusing and what they're asking for you in their reporting? Can you give us any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say they're not just important, they're critical, right? Given how fragmented the market is just from a number of platforms, and the flexibility of the consumer to dip in and out based off of what they want to watch, when they want to watch, SVOD is really hard to create a stability and predictability for. It's really hard to, cost of customer acquisition is terribly hard in an SVOD, and which is why we've seen so many proliferate or do sidebars into AVOD type support. But in order to do that right, you need to kind of, not to parrot back everything, but you need to understand the audience. You need to know how you can monetize, who you're monetizing against, so that way the advertiser. So I think, especially in an AVOD and a fast environment, the level of insights, not just from the consumption, not just from the viewer, not just from the ad tech, not just from the DSP, not just from the advertiser perspective. You have to put that all together, because that's the only way you can understand it and optimize it moving forward. Is one partner, is one advertiser, is one DSP, is one content. All of that interweaves, and it's a lot of data. Don't get me wrong; it's gigabytes and terabytes of data. However, it tells the story of the consumer, which is ultimately what matters for optimization and growth.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about productive steps forward, which I think requires that we start with what organizations are actually doing internally today. So we asked, given the state that you're getting the data in from all of these different platforms, how are you managing this? And then we'll talk about, what are maybe better ways. So we asked, how are you tracking data across all of these distribution platforms? And you can see most executives said that they are evaluating data from each service or platform separately. And then also that they have this internal team that's manually creating a report that's pulling the KPIs from each service or platform. Far fewer say that they are using an automated, tool of some sort or a third-party reporting service. So a whole lot of organizations trying to essentially make do. Just to complement that with something that we've heard in the interviews, some of the content owners in particular might be relatively small studios, relatively niche focused. They're in horror, they're in anime, they're in, all these awesome categories, but might have a relatively have a millions and millions of dollars of assets under their hands, but the team itself is quite small. And so we heard quite a bit of pain of like, it's me, I'm doing it. And man, it takes me a lot of time, and we're doing the best we can, or I try and get some help, but it's a pretty manual process. So, are there, obviously you've talked a little bit about how SymphonyAI can help, but maybe you can explain a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, we hear that pretty frequently as well when we have initial dialogues with the ecosystem. I think some of the biggest challenges with everything that I'm seeing on screen is that it's time to knowledge is really challenging, right? So if you're getting each source, each platform into separately, you have to try to make sense for that. You have to manually, you have to compile, and it's not uncommon that we hear that people in the market are spending weeks, if not more than weeks, into months, just to get the data in a point where they can understand it and make decisions against that. And not to be cliche, but the ship has sailed at that point, right? You're now running months and months behind what the consumer is telling you is important to them. So really, increasing that time to value or decreasing that time to value through automation, through tools, to give you a better snapshot of what's happening now, not what happens, last quarter. That's super important. The other thing that I'm super optimistic about is as we get closer and closer to, in my mind, the nirvana is a real-time flow from the platform down to the content owner to understand what is working right this very second, allows, especially in the context of like fast, to actually do a couple of different things. One is modify the schedule based on what's working, right? Or perhaps even, and the technology does exist for this, create, kind of a detour, and you've got a dedicated fast channel, which is slightly different than the primary because that's what this region or this demographic's really searching for. And you can actually almost create kind of a living, breathing ecosystem and a dialogue with your consumer if you understand what they're saying here and now, not what they said at Christmas, right? And so those are some of the things that I think are important for the market today, and some of the things I'm really excited about in the future.
Yeah, that sort of nirvana, that ideal that we're reaching to, I think it's important to say is realistic, right? And if companies are not already planning for this real-time, very hyper-personalized recommendation and be able to work on that level, right? I think that's where the industry is definitely going. And a lot of that has to do with new tools, AI and generative AI advancements, which are really speeding up the timeline on all sorts of again, great tools and pieces of development in the ecosystem. So we did ask about AI in particular to understand how streaming executives are planning to make use of AI tools in 2024 and 2025. We know that there's a lot of sensitivity around the use of generative AI when it comes to content production and, the great creative work that the writers and the producers and the actors do. But obviously, there are so many applications for AI and generative AI in particular when you think about business operations. So the number one place that streaming executives told us that they plan to be using AI in 2024 and 2025 are for content recommendations and personalization, which is exactly what you were just mentioning, but also content acquisition and production decisions, right? So trying to better understand where I should place that dollar. Ad targeting also coming up. When we dove deeper in the interviews to ask, where are you using AI today? It is primarily related to things around the content related to metadata, subtitling, that sort of thing, but really not applied yet to actually making sense of the data that they're getting from all of these disparate sources, which actually seems like a pretty good application for artificial intelligence, to help out.
Yeah, and it's actually something we're working on now to bring to market very early this year, which is an AI-backed kind of forecasting engine that really accomplishes many of the things you see on screen here. Because again, you're looking at, in many cases, whether it be ad revenue or content, engagements, channel origination data, there's so many different data sets that come together. It's unmanageable by a human. It truly is. So technology can help, but then when you get into forecasting, right, understanding kind of going into the acquisition decisions, forecasting what this content's going to do versus that content relative to what you know of your audience, now you're getting into even more complication from trying to do it by hand. And that's where AI can really automate that and give a lot of insight into, scenario A versus B all the way through ZZZ to really help you understand what the likely outcome is of different decisions, how it's likely to impact your subscriber base, and ultimately your bottom line. But we're talking terabytes worth of data to do that right. And the other thing I'll note is, especially on the digital side, I think I may have mentioned this before, it's very fickle, right? What I as Mark watch today on a platform is not probably what I'm going to watch tomorrow. What my wife watches is wholly different than what I watch. And so there's all these different dimensions. It's not, back in the day, it was kind of seasonality. And now you got seasonality almost on a minute by minute basis. And so you really need some advanced tools to help understand patterns that are deep within the data, as well as the kind of the conditional, whether it be seasonality or whatever, that all influence viewership to give you a better idea for what's coming next and what actions to take to make that next best step.
Yeah, super exciting. I'm excited to see some of those new tools, right? And how they can help. We saw a lot of tools focused, especially on the subscriber side, about trying to predict when somebody might churn and what you can do to effectively keep somebody from churning, when the business, and of course, subscribers still absolutely matter today. You absolutely want to keep your churn down, but then applying this also to more ad-based scenarios and more real-time scenarios. I mean, really, really interesting stuff. We do have another question. So I thought, since I can see it, we might take that before moving on. So this is related to our advertising talking, like we were, a moment ago, that, Joel here asked, there are established standards associated with ad insertion for linear video used by existing distributors. Why don't FAST channels and AVOD content creators adopt these standards? And, from your ad tech background, I don't know if there's like specific standards that you're, interested in or that you'd like to comment on for Joel.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a high level, most, if not do, kind of adopt. I mean, there's generally accepted standards. There's organizations like IAB, et cetera, that kind of set forth new standards in the evolution of the ad insertion methodologies. And really, most everyone in the FAST and AVOD ecosystem do adopt standards. They might be different standards than what was happening on the linear side, but they are kind of the consistent standards nonetheless, because that's the only way for kind of the programmatic side to be healthy, right? That said, those standards are changing often. I mean, not so often that it's not impossible to keep up with, but there's always optimization. There's always more tagging. That's kind of a cliche word now, but that type of data, material data for the target, for the advertiser, that's constantly evolving. So I think it's an issue, obviously, too, with the size and scale of your relative partner, right? Some of the biggest DSPs, they're going to keep absolutely on top of the evolving standards and optimize and take advantage of everything they can. Whereas if you're doing a smaller, more bespoke, or doing direct, it's harder to keep up with some of those standards. That's not to say that they're rogue, but they might be on standard 1.6 versus 1.7, right? So I did want to be clear that there are standards, they are being adhered to, but those standards don't usually include kind of deliverable data back to the content owner, and that's where things start to get a little shaky, because if you don't know how and why it was monetized, it's hard to optimize that as a business moving forward.
Great. Thank you for taking that question. So just wanted to sort of have a wrap up point here, and then again open for any other questions that might be coming in here. So we've heard this sense that, again, if we take a big picture view of where the streaming market is, there are services that are struggling mightily, services that seem to be doing quite well. Everyone's trying to still evolve and experiment with the business model to find what's going to work. And this sense that the sort of the gatekeeping that in some ways, is necessary or makes sense when you think about data privacy and security, but the limits of sharing even anonymized data that's happening is unnecessarily limiting the market and limiting the industry. And again, if you take kind of a bigger picture view of the video space, is not the only place that consumers spend their leisure time, right? The eyeballs are in social and in gaming and in all these other areas as well. And so there's not just these internal competitive dynamics, but the video landscape is competing, with other forms of digital entertainment. And so the sense from streaming executives that, man, we're really limiting ourselves here, and we can unlock more growth with a little bit more transparency. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, well, full well, I've been a huge advocate of data transparency, and to a degree, data transparency amongst content owners, right? I'll age myself, but back in the olden days when you were wholly dependent upon a Nielsen comp score, kind of the sampling entities on the linear side, you could pretty easily kind of roll that back and say, how well is Seinfeld doing relative to my content that might be conflicting or competing with, for eyeballs in that slot. And in the digital side, there are so many platforms. Content is distributed in so many, 18 plus on the average, right? Understanding, where everything is how you fit in with those partners and what content you're contributing relative to their overall library. That's one thing. But two, having, again, not to be repetitive, but an understanding of how is it doing, right? What is the consumer telling us they want to watch, what they want more of, what do they want to be easier to find from a discovery perspective? I absolutely agree. More data transparency, even against competitors, I think will help, because then everyone understands what Mark is wanting to watch, what he's willing to invest his time or his money in. So that way people can kind of format themselves and put them in front of me more frequently, and try to not stave off social. That ship has certainly sailed, but to stay competitive and really bring that information, technology, and entertainment to the viewership.
Yeah, and I think that there's obviously recognition that there has to be a benefit for everybody in the market, and so certainly the platforms as well, right? So there's a real business to being the platform, which is why they're doing, why they are doing what they're doing, and so the benefits have to be kind of shared across. One point while we see if there are any other questions that come in on the social. Social's quickly coming to the TV screen too. So if you're not thinking, right, like that it's just like a mobile thing, we had a TikTok executive, at our featured video event talking about getting TikTok more onto the screen, and consumers' habits and behaviors are just going to keep changing, right? And so trying to stay on top of that and really be able to see as an industry, what new formats, new content, where are consumers, because it's constantly shifting.
Yeah, and I think I'll just as a final point there before we see if Eric has any other questions, this space is transforming so quickly right now. Obviously, you kind of lit a fire under it with COVID. Everyone's viewership habits changed. The rush into the digital side because there was just more time at home, more time with the family. All of those things really shifted the behaviors, I think, much more quickly than it would have happened organically outside of a COVID type event. It changed windowing for theatrical releases. All these different things are changing, and I think, Jennifer, you hit the nail on the head when you said everyone's kind of trying things. They're still trying things. AVOD versus SVOD. What content to highlight at what points on what platforms. We certainly haven't settled yet. And understanding, again, going back to what the consumer wants, because that's all that matters. Everything else is a derivative of what Mark was willing to spend his time watching. It is really kind of in flux right now, and understanding the data by what Mark is saying by his viewership, I think, is critical to the long-term stability of the overall market.
Absolutely. So if there are any other questions? Hey, Eric.
Hey, y'all. Thanks a lot. That's a great overview. And a very powerful survey, I think. Thanks so much for giving us a little bit of a peek into it, and for doing it, and for making it available. So I'm definitely going to take advantage of that. That's a big QR code up there, at least on my monitor. So take a shot of that. If you don't have the QR code, where can people go to get the report, get the white paper?
Yeah. So, please go ahead, Jennifer.
I was going to say it's going to be on both SymphonyAI's website as well as Parks.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so go visit Parks and SymphonyAI for many reasons, but not the least of which is to get access to the swipe card. It is a really big problem, though, right? Access to data, and in many senses, it just seems like organizations, distributors, content creators are flying blind. I mean, things were better when we had linear, and at least we had Nielsen, right? In some sense.
Yeah, far from perfect, but directionally, everyone was kind of working off of the same general rules.
Yeah.
And on the digital side, ignorance can be catastrophic. It's challenging at best, catastrophic at worst. And just again, understanding how things, the why behind, is critically important.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in some extent, that's why many of the large studios decided to go direct to consumer, because they weren't getting the data that they wanted and they needed. That from an economic standpoint or financial standpoint, that may not be working out as well as they hoped, but you can see how important it is, an indicator of how important data is. Yeah, it's an interesting place, and it's tough to sell ads against it if you don't know what your demo is, and if you don't know what your viewership looks like. It's hard to get out of kind of that programmatic quagmire.
Yeah, and I think one thing to just leave, if there's one kind of takeaway, I would invite everyone on the call to have a dialogue with your partner. Say, look, I need more data for these reasons, right? I'm not trying to use it to negotiate harder against you when we come up for renewal. I need to understand X, and it benefits you in Y ways. As much as people have historically been resistant to data sharing, as I said, I'm starting to see us turn the corner on that. But more importantly, they're always willing to to have a conversation. They want to understand why certain things matter to you. And conversely, they might have asks for you as a content owner, right? So, have that conversation. They're all absolutely willing to have it. And then, think through, partner with, someone who can bring in third-party data sets to complement that, fill in any data gaps, and really just completely paint that picture to the extent we can.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about standards, and I think one of the points y'all had was that there's on average there's something 18 different platforms that you have to kind of contend with, and the reporting that you are getting is not coming in, as we know, in a standard format. And we've got some initiatives underway or we'd like to get underway to help develop some standards. But even the definition of title is different, and
Right.
so like there's a long ways to go, and getting some help with that and aggregating all of that data, I think can be really, really valuable and save that executive's time for doing executive stuff instead of munging data.
Yeah. Make decisions on the data rather than trying to get their arms wrapped around it.
Exactly. Well, I'm again, thanks so much. I'm really I'm excited to take a look at this white paper, and thanks for joining us, both of you. We gotta run and get things closed up, but I just want to remind everybody to head on out to the websites there, or take a picture of that QR code and send it on to your friends. It's a valuable resource and something I think that we can really help all of us that are trying to do our best in this industry. So once again, thank you, Mark, Jennifer. And I want to thank all of our audience for attending and for your continued support of OTT.X. The session was recorded and it's going to be available on our website shortly. That's OTT.X.org, along with an impressive collection of presentations from our online and in-person events over the last few years. Do check those out. A few important notes that I just wanted to reiterate from the world of OTT.X. We just released our annual industry report, which offers a comprehensive overview of the OTT market and identifies emerging trends and opportunities that are shaping the future. Do take a look at that. It's free for OTT.X members and available to purchase for everyone. You can access it from our site, OTT.X.org. We've got another episode of our thought-provoking, entertaining, and informative series, The Buzz, coming up. That's on February 14th. You'll get a chance to hear from some of the industry's most experienced, insightful, and yes, vocal pundits about what's going on right now in streaming. So mark your calendars for that. If you've enjoyed this session and this series over the years, please pass it along to your friends and colleagues. We'd love your help getting the word out about OTT.X and what we're doing to support OTT and CTV businesses. Of course, if you're not a member of OTT.X, we'd love to help you out with that. So please, reach out to us, info@OTT.X.org, or head out to the site and learn a little bit more about becoming a member, joining the cool kids, and being members of OTT.X. So thanks again, SymphonyAI and Parks, for today's webinar, and to all of our members who are making all this stuff that we do possible. That concludes our webinar today. Thanks for joining us and being a part of the OTT.X community. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.